Hello class. In this video I want to show how to use Illustrator to sort of custom render bricks. Again, this is in a series of videos I've been doing about materials and how instead of letting a photo wheel rendering engine do it, you can actually control everything you want yourself if you want to render it, say something like in Illustrator. Now, bricks is a bit more complicated than some of the other materials I have shown, and I'll talk about that along the way because it has a very specific set of geometry that if it's not correct, it won't look right. And I, of course, as usual, have this sort of simple perspective up here on screen, which I'll show you how to do, and that's because the perspective is a harder case than just sort of, say, an elevation, which this would also work for. So with that introduction, I've got my sort of simple wall and perspective with a little window just to show how that goes as I typically do in these videos. And what I will do is I'll just unlock a couple of these layers and delete the work that I have done and just start over again. So there we go. Now, the first thing that I do here is I actually put the joints. So I have a layer here for joints, and that's just the mortar, if you will, want to call it that, and pick that color. So I have already gone ahead and selected a color for this, which I'm just going to use a fill. And there's the numbers. If you want to copy the numbers down, of course, you can make any adjustments that you like to this. And I'm just going to trace out the entirety of this object here. And the bricks will come through and fill in all the gaps later. So we'll see here in the next step how we'll do the individual bricks. And the bricks will be individual so that you'll just see through to the joints in between. Of course, I have this window layer. If I show my layers really quick, I have this window layer here. So that's just going to block out everything I do. And I recommend that if you have windows or trim or anything else, you can just block it out by putting layers on top of it. So simplify it by just drawing the material across the entire surface of that wall. So there you go. I did the joints, and I have another layer here just to do the bricks on one face. As you can see, I got a layer for the other wall as well. You could put them on the same layer if you would like. Doesn't really matter. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to create a series of bricks actually just through creating a line. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set my stroke color. So I'm going to turn my fill to nothing, and I'm going to set my stroke color to a dark gray. I like to make sort of the modern look of a dark gray or a black brick. You can see the numbers here, but in theory, the whole thing will work no matter what color brick you're using. So that's what I'll do. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a line, and I'm going to start at the top of my wall. Actually, I'll just draw it straight across. So if you're drawing an elevation or something like this, you would just draw a line straight across and you'll follow the steps. I'll show how to do the perspective at the end. It gets a little complicated again, but we'll do that. So I'm going to draw a line, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set my stroke width to be about how deep I think bricks are, particularly at the sort of close end of the perspective. So I set mine to 0.5. I think that'll work. Of course, your drawing is going to be specific to the scale that you're working at. So set it to a width. That's going to be one individual brick width, as you'll see. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a dashed line. And you want to set your dash to be about how long one brick is, sort of in the foreground element of the brick. And then you want to set your dash to be how thick you want the mortar to be at that case, or the joint to be at that case. So I think I actually used 12 and 2. I'll go with 12 and 2. I can always adjust it later on. So that looks pretty good. So we can see I got one row of brick in elevation at this point in time. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select this. I'm going to use a transform move on this to make the second row of bricks. So I'm going to go to Effects, Distort, Transform, Transform, and I'm going to make one copy because I'm just going to do one row down, and I'm going to move this down basically a unit of brick, as I'll turn on my preview so we can see. So I just moved it down one unit of brick, trying to make the joints match the horizontal joint line match the vertical joint line there. Of course, most bricks aren't stacked up this way. Sometimes they are. If they are, you can you don't need a horizontal move, but all I need to do is do the same thing to the horizontal move. And when I do that, we can see that I've got these offset brick patterns as would typically be the case. And I'm going to say OK. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to take this whole set, which is 2 rows of bricks, and I'm going to copy a bunch of times to fill up this side of the wall. Now, since in the perspective case, since this wall is has a different vanishing point than this wall, I'm going to have to do the 2 sides as separate elements. So I'm going to do it again. I'm going to go Effects, same exact thing, Distort, Transform, Transform. And it's going to ask me, do I want to apply a new effect? And yes, I do want to apply a new effect. And I'll do a preview. And this time I'm going to do a bunch of copies. Now, I already tested this out preloading into the video, so I want 17 copies here. And we can see what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move them vertically this time. And basically, the vertical move is going to be double what the last one was. So if we remember when I made this row of bricks, I did a move of 0.09. So since I'm doing 2 rows of bricks now, I want to double it to 0.18. And when I do that, we can see I sort of fill in sort of an elevation all those bricks walls just like that. And hopefully this will be enough. Again, if it's not, I can come in and adjust this transform at any time and add the amount of bricks as I need going forth. I also might even want to make this line a little bit long because we can see here it's not quite covering the edge. Ultimately, as is often the case when you're doing a perspective in Illustrator, you're going to have to use a mask and block out the part of the effect anyway, so it doesn't matter if I make my line a little bit long and go past the wall just like that. Again, it just sort of automatically adds all the bricks in for me, and I'll trim it up later. It's basically what I'm trying to say. Now, to continue the process, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add effects to this line, much like I did in my stone video, because bricks and stone, they're pretty similar. So the fundamental of that is a stained glass effect, and then on top of that, a sponge effect. So I'm going to apply that to my line here. So go to Texture, Stained Glass, and we can see it puts these little sort of circles in it, and 411 is what I'm going to do. But of course, you'll need to make your own settings. I feel it works about if you have 2 cells per brick, approximately, is about the setting that you want to scale correctly there. So it puts that on that way. And then I'm going to take this. We don't want it to be read as such strong black lines for those cells of the stained glass. So I'll go to Artistic and run Sponge. And we can see it sort of makes a very sort of shadow-like, rough-like looking pattern, which is what the kind of effect brick wants to have. So I will just adjust my settings slightly, adjust them to whatever you want, and there we go. Now I've got a brick-like pattern here. Again, if you're in elevation, you might be pretty close to finishing how you want this to look. There is another effect that you could apply to this that I sometimes feel works, and I'm going to apply this now, and that's a little drop shadow, to give a little drop shadow to make these bricks feel a little three-dimensional. So go to Effects, Stylize, Drop Shadow, and I'm going to keep the opacity at 75. You could set the opacity to whatever works for you. In this case, I need a pretty small X and Y offset because my bricks are small. And of course, in this case, with such a small offset, a blur of 0 would make sense. So we'll let this run, and we can see if I zoom in a little bit, we just get a little bit of a drop shadow. Just gives a little bit of a three-dimensional effect to it. So, so there you would have a brick wall in elevation. Now we want to get to making this into perspective. And like other materials I've done where I've done perspective, I find if you have in your appearances, if you have a few Photoshop filters up in here, you can use a warp filter and it'll give you like a perspective-like effect. There is a little bit of a tricky thing here with brick though. So I don't know why I always go to bulge. I think more than bulge would work, but I'm going to go to bulge as I usually do. And I'm going to actually send the bend to 0 because I don't want any effect like this. But what I do is I want to set the horizontal move. So again, I tested this out beforehand, you might have to spend some time working with it, but about a 30% horizontal bend in my perspective is going to work. When I first apply this, we're going to see that nothing really happens. This is the way it works because I have my appearance box up right over here, and we see it automatically puts the bulge above all my objects. But as soon as I actually drop this down below all these Photoshop effects, it then transforms it into this perspective. All right, so we can see in this case my 30% bulge is pretty close. I would argue, if I'm really looking at it, that this top brick is, well, it's not really so bad. It's a little misaligned, and this bottom one is pretty good too in this case. And so if that's the case, good, you're good to go. But I do want to make some notes if your perspective does not look this good. And the issue is that this bulge effect, it always puts the horizon line, if you will, or the vanishing point halfway through your material object. So in this case, from my perspective, it's working pretty well because my horizon line is pretty much halfway through this wall. But if this brick were high or if this brick were low only, then you wouldn't get that effect. Your vanishing point wouldn't be at the correct spot. And because of the breakdown of the horizontal joints and the vertical joints and the way the brick is so geometric, it can be noticed. So if that's the case, you just want to make your brick wider. So if your horizon line were up here and sort of at this height where my cursor is, and it wants to start down here, I might have to bring my brick way up high. I'm going to mask it anyway, as we can see. I need to mask it. So it doesn't matter how high or low it goes, how much extending it needs to go to match your horizon line correctly. Now that could be a bit of work, so there could be some shortcuts, because if I could also alternatively expand all these elements. Now that I made them, I could expand them into individual bricks with the object expand command, and then I could run the transform free distort command in Illustrator to make it, because they'd be individual objects. I wouldn't be able to edit it as freely anymore because I would have sort of break it apart to individual elements, but that's another approach to matching the perspective. Alternatively, stop at the elevation, bring it into Photoshop, and use perspective distort in Photoshop would also be a fairly easy way to do it. The way I like to work, of course, is to try to keep everything editable, because I never know when something's going to change, which is why I sort of do it the more complicated way that I've shown here. But, do it whatever way works for you. So once you've got the perspective correct, then it's a matter of doing the mask. Mask is pretty straightforward. So I'm going to go to my transparency tool. I'm going to go to Make Mask. And I'll go a second. By default, it sort of goes to nothing here. So I got to select on this box to go to my mask. I'm going to set my fill to white because I'm going to trace around the object itself to show so the white part, when I'm going to use my pen tool to draw in, is going to just come back. And so as soon as I make my third line here, we can start to see that brick wall come back. And I close it off. And of course, just anytime you're doing a mask, you can see you always have to draw back to regular mode to go back to the regular brick mode. And there we go. I've got a brick wall right there. And I would lock this layer. And in the case of the setup, I won't show all the steps again, but I basically did the exact same thing for this wall, except for I had to use different numbers for perspectives and the setting of the wall, of the brick size with the dash line and all of that to get this wall correct. So I'll just pause the video really quick. And there you go. Through the magic of editing, the other brick wall was done. Of course, it would work for any walls that you would like. And go ahead and use this. Feel free to change any of the settings you like, play with colors, play with effects. But I really encourage everyone to take control of their own drawings and render them the way you want to be rendered, rather than having the photoreal rendering, which is a great technique too, but sometimes it's fun just to take control. So go explore, have fun, and make great drawings. Thanks, and I'll see you next video.